The Botany of Desire, by Michael Pollan. Introduction. Imagine it's the spring of 1806. You're standing on the banks of the Ohio River, watching the water churn with keelboats and barges carrying families west into the wilderness. And then you see it. A strange little craft, unlike anything else on the river. It's two hollowed-out logs, lashed together like a catamaran. In one, a skinny man of about 30 is lounging, maybe even sleeping, wearing a burlap coffee sack for a shirt and, some say, a tin pot for a hat. He seems to be trusting the river to take him where he needs to go. And the other canoe? It's riding low in the water, filled to the brim with a mountain of seeds, carefully covered with moss and mud to keep them safe from the sun. The man, you might have heard of him. His name was John Chapman, but people on the frontier already had a nickname for him, Johnny Appleseed. And those seeds, well, they were apple seeds. Enough to plant several whole orchards in the wilderness. Now, we all know the story of Johnny Appleseed, the gentle folk hero who planted apple trees for pioneers. But that's the Disney version. The truth is far more interesting, and it holds a secret. The secret is that those apples weren't for eating. They were sour, bitter, and wild. In fact, there was only one thing they were good for: making hard cider. Johnny Appleseed wasn't bringing a healthy snack to the frontier. He was bringing the gift of alcohol. This one surprising fact uncovers a much deeper story. It's the story of a book that turned my understanding of the world completely upside down. It's called The Botany of Desire, and it was written by a brilliant thinker and gardener named Michael Pollan. For years, this book has been a quiet bestseller, passed from one curious mind to another, because it asks a question so simple, and yet so profound, it changes everything. We think we are in charge of nature, that we choose which plants to grow in our gardens and on our farms. But what if we've got it all wrong? What if, all this time, the plants have been using us? That's the bold promise of this book, and it's the journey I want to take you on today. We're going to look at the world from a plant's eye view. We'll explore how 4 everyday plants, the apple, the tulip, marijuana, and the potato, have cleverly manipulated 4 of our most powerful human desires to get us to help them conquer the world. By the end of our time together, you'll never look at an apple, a tulip, or even a French fry the same way again. You'll see them not as passive objects of our attention, but as active, ingenious partners in a grand evolutionary dance. And in seeing them differently, you might just start to see yourself, and your own desires, as part of nature in a way you never imagined. Book summary. It all begins in a garden. The author, Michael Pollan, is planting potato seeds one afternoon, and he's watching a nearby apple tree buzzing with bees. He starts thinking, what's the real difference between what he's doing, planting potatoes, and what the bees are doing, flitting from one apple blossom to another? A bee probably thinks it's the master of its own destiny. It sees a flower, desires the sweet nectar inside, and goes to get it. The flower is just an object. But we know better, don't we? We know the flower has evolved its beautiful colors, its enticing scent, and its sugary nectar for one purpose: to trick that bee into becoming its courier. The bee gets a meal, but the flower gets its pollen carried to another flower. It gets to reproduce. It's a brilliant deal, and it's called coevolution. 2 species, acting in their own self-interest, end up helping each other thrive. And that's when the question hit him: if the flower is manipulating the bee, who's manipulating him? Did he really choose to plant that potato? Or did the potato, somehow, make him do it? He remembers seeing the potato in a seed catalog. It promised buttery yellow flesh. His desire was triggered. He ordered the seeds, and now here he is, on his hands and knees, doing the potato's bidding, helping it make more copies of itself. He had become the potato's bee. This single, powerful idea is the heart of the Botany of Desire. It's the story of how plants have tapped into our deepest desires to spread their genes all over the planet. We think we've domesticated them, but in many ways, they have domesticated us. Pollan focuses on 4 fundamental human desires, and the 4 plants that have mastered them. First, there's the desire for sweetness, and the story of the apple. As we saw with Johnny Appleseed, the apple story in America is not what we think. For centuries, sweetness was a rare and precious sensation. Sugar was an expensive luxury. For most people, the primary source of sweetness came from fruit, and in America, that usually meant the apple. But the apple had a secret weapon. When you plant an apple seed, the tree that grows will not be like its parent. An apple from a red delicious seed won't give you red delicious apples. It will give you a wild, unpredictable, and almost always sour little fruit. This genetic variability is the apple's superpower. It means that every seed is a lottery ticket, a brand new experiment. When the first settlers brought apples to America, their carefully cultivated European varieties didn't do so well. The climate was too harsh. But the seeds they planted, those wild, unpredictable seeds, went to work. They produced millions of new variations, and through trial and error, the apple reinvented itself. It adapted to the American soil and seasons. And this is where Johnny Appleseed becomes so important. He wasn't just a folk hero, he was an agent of evolution. By planting thousands upon thousands of seeds, not grafted branches that would create identical clones, but wild seeds, he was conducting a massive genetic experiment across the American frontier. He was helping the apple explore its own possibilities. And why did the settlers want these sour, cider apples so badly? Because the frontier was a hard, lonely place. Water wasn't always safe to drink. Cider provided a safer, more stable, and more cheerful beverage. It was a comfort, a social lubricant, and a source of intoxication. For the apple, our desire for sweetness, and the alcohol that sugar could become, was its ticket to conquering a continent. The apple gave us sweetness and alcohol. In return, we became its human bumblebees, spreading its genes from the East Coast all the way to the West. It was a co-evolutionary bargain. But today, that bargain has changed. We've fallen in love with a very narrow idea of the apple. We want uniform, blemish-free, and relentlessly sweet fruit. The market is dominated by a handful of varieties, like the Red Delicious, which Pollan describes as offering a sweetness without dimension. In our quest for a perfect, predictable apple, we've suppressed its wildness. We've traded thousands of unique flavors for a single, boring note. The vast genetic library that Johnny Appleseed helped create is slowly disappearing, all because our desire for sweetness has become less adventurous. From sweetness, we move to another, perhaps even more powerful desire: beauty and the incredible story of the tulip. If you think about it, a flower is one of the most extravagantly useless things in nature. You can't eat it. It doesn't provide shelter. And yet, humans across almost every culture have been captivated by flowers. Why? Pollan suggests our attraction might have evolutionary roots. For our hunter-gatherer ancestors, flowers were a reliable sign that fruit and food would soon follow. The brain that was good at noticing and remembering flowers was the brain that led its owner to a meal. Over time, that useful signal, the flower, became a thing of beauty in its own right. But no flower has played on our desire for beauty quite like the tulip. The tulip began as a humble wildflower in the mountains of Kazakhstan. But it had a talent for transformation. The Ottoman Turks were the first to become obsessed with it, breeding tulips with long, dagger-like petals that became symbols of power and refinement. But when the tulip arrived in Holland in the 17th century, our desire for its beauty reached a fever pitch of madness. This was the time of tulipomania. For a few short years, between 1634 and 1637, this simple flower became the most sought-after and expensive object in all of Europe. People traded their homes, their businesses, their life savings, all for a single tulip bulb. At the peak of the frenzy, one bulb of a particularly prized variety, the Semper Augustus, was sold for the price of a Grand Canal house in Amsterdam. What drove this collective insanity? It was a particular kind of beauty. The most valuable tulips were the broken ones. A plain, single-colored tulip might spontaneously break, its petals erupting in intricate, feathered flames of a contrasting color. A white tulip might suddenly be streaked with crimson, a yellow one with violet. These patterns were unpredictable, unique, and breathtakingly beautiful. Growers tried everything to make their tulips break. They sprinkled paint powders on the soil, hoping the color would seep into the bulb. They used pigeon droppings and dust from old walls. Nothing worked reliably. The breaking of a tulip was seen as a magical, almost divine event. It wasn't until the 20th century, with the invention of the electron microscope, that the secret was finally revealed. The beautiful flames weren't magic. They were the symptom of a disease. A virus, spread by aphids, was infecting the tulips, causing their color to break. This discovery changes everything. For centuries, humans had selected tulips for a trait, a sickness, that actually weakened them. A broken tulip produced fewer and smaller offspring. From a purely Darwinian perspective, this makes no sense. Why would a species be rewarded for being sick? But from the virus's point of view, it was a brilliant strategy. By making the tulip more beautiful in human eyes, the virus tricked us into spreading it. The more people desired the broken tulips, the more infected bulbs were planted, and the more the virus prospered. It had inserted itself into the co-evolutionary dance between plant and person. Pollan uses the tulip to explore the very nature of beauty. He describes two opposing forces, which the ancient Greeks personified in their gods. There is Apollo, the god of order, clarity, and form. The classic tulip, with its clean lines and perfect symmetry, is an Apollonian flower. Then there is Dionysus, the god of intoxication, chaos, and abandon. Think of a wild, fragrant, overflowing rose. That's a Dionysian flower. True beauty, Pollan suggests, happens when these two forces are held in tension. The broken tulip was so captivating because it was a Dionysian eruption of wild, unpredictable color within the strict, Apollonian form of the flower. The virus was the touch of chaos that made the orderly tulip perfect. The apple played on our desire for sweetness, the tulip on our desire for beauty. But there is another desire, one that is darker, more complex, and more controversial. It's the desire to change not the world around us, but the world within us. This is the desire for intoxication, and its champion is the plant marijuana. Virtually every culture on Earth has used psychoactive plants to alter consciousness. The desire to transcend our everyday mind seems to be a fundamental human drive. We see it in children spinning until they're dizzy, and in the rituals of shamans and priests throughout history. Why do plants produce these powerful, mind-altering chemicals? Mostly, it's for defense. These molecules are weapons in a silent chemical war against insects and predators. Nicotine paralyzes bugs. Caffeine kills their appetite. And the compounds in plants like datura can drive a predator mad with terrifying visions. But somewhere along the line, our curious, experimental species discovered that these plant poisons, in the right doses, could do interesting things to our brains. And a new co-evolutionary bargain was struck. The plants that could gratify our desire for intoxication, for transcendence, for a different way of seeing, these were the plants we took under our care. The story of marijuana in modern America is a fascinating case study in this process. When Pollan tried to grow it in the early 1980s, it was a lanky, tropical plant, Cannabis sativa, not well suited to the northern climate. Most of the pot in America was imported from Mexico or Colombia. But then came the war on drugs. By cracking down on smugglers and spraying foreign fields with herbicides, the government inadvertently created a huge, protected market for domestic marijuana. It was a perfect, if accidental, act of protectionism. This new intense pressure changed the plant forever. Outdoor growing became too risky. So, the growers moved indoors. They started experimenting. They brought in seeds of a different species, Cannabis indica, from Afghanistan. This was a short, stout, potent plant that could flower in northern latitudes. Then, the real revolution began. Amateur breeders, working in secret, started crossing the uplifting, cerebral high of sativa with the potent, compact body of indica. They created new hybrids, like Skunk One and Northern Lights, that were perfectly adapted to a new, entirely artificial environment, the indoor grow room. Under high-intensity lights, with controlled irrigation and enriched CO2, the marijuana plant was pushed to its absolute limits. Freed from the constraints of nature, it became something new. Potency skyrocketed. What was once a fairly mild intoxicant became an incredibly powerful one. The taboo against the plant didn't destroy it, it made it stronger. It's a stunning example of coevolution happening at hyperspeed. But why do we desire this change in consciousness? Pollan takes us into the world of neuroscience, and the discoveries are mind-boggling. Scientists found that THC, the active compound in marijuana, fits perfectly into a specific receptor in the human brain. This was a puzzle. Why would our brains have a lock designed for a key made by a plant? The answer came when they discovered that our brains make their own version of THC. They called it anandamide, from the Sanskrit word for inner bliss. We have a built-in cannabinoid system. And what does this system do? Among other things, it helps us to forget. We tend to think of forgetting as a failure of memory, but it's one of the most important things our brain does. Every second, we are bombarded with a storm of sensory information. If we remembered all of it, we would be instantly overwhelmed. The cannabinoid system acts as a filter, allowing us to let go of the unimportant, to clear the slate of our consciousness from moment to moment, so we can focus on what matters. Pollan suggests that when we consume cannabis, we are overstimulating this natural forgetting faculty. And this, he argues, is the key to understanding the marijuana high. By temporarily wiping the slate of our short-term memory, the plant allows us to perceive the world as if for the first time. The baggage of past experience, of familiarity, of boredom, is lifted. A familiar song sounds new and profound. A simple bite of food becomes a revelation of flavor. We are plunged into the intensity of the present moment. This, Pollan proposes, is the forbidden knowledge that psychoactive plants offer, the experience of pure, unadulterated presence. And perhaps this is why it is so often forbidden. Our civilization, built on both capitalism and Judeo-Christian ethics, is fundamentally future-oriented. We are taught to delay gratification, to work now for a reward later, whether it's salvation in the afterlife or a comfortable retirement. A plant that offers fulfillment in the here and now is a threat to that entire system. It short-circuits the engine of desire that keeps our world running. This brings us to our final desire, the one that most defines our modern world, the desire for control. And its plant is the humble, yet world-changing, potato. The story begins, once again, with a radical contrast. In the Andes Mountains, where the potato was first domesticated, the Inca farmers understood the power of diversity. They cultivated thousands of different varieties: blue, yellow, red, long, round, starchy, waxy, each one perfectly adapted to a specific microclimate. Their system was a complex tapestry, a polyculture that was incredibly resilient. No single disease or pest could ever wipe it out. But when the potato came to Europe, it found a culture obsessed with simplification. This obsession reached its tragic peak in Ireland. The Irish peasantry came to depend on a single food source, the potato. And worse, they came to depend on a single variety of potato, the lumper. For miles and miles, the fields of Ireland were a monoculture, a vast, genetically identical landscape. This system seemed like a miracle of control and efficiency. The lumper grew easily in poor soil and produced huge amounts of food. The population of Ireland boomed. But this illusion of control was built on a foundation of extreme vulnerability. In the summer of 1845, a fungus arrived from America. Phytophthora infestans. The late blight. The lumper potato had no resistance to it. The fungus swept through Ireland like a fire, turning lush green fields to black, rotting slime almost overnight. The result was the Great Famine. 1 million people starved to death. Another million were forced to emigrate. It was a brutal lesson in the dangers of monoculture, a lesson that nature will always have the final say in our attempts to control it. Which brings us to Pollan's own garden, and his experiment with a potato called the new leaf. This wasn't an ancient heirloom. It was a potato created in a lab by the Monsanto Corporation. It was a genetically engineered potato. Scientists had taken a gene from a soil bacterium called Bt, a gene that produces a natural insecticide, and inserted it directly into the potato's DNA. The result was a plant that produced its own pesticide in every single cell of its leaves, its stems, and its tubers. It was the ultimate expression of human control. Pollan takes us to the potato fields of Idaho, where industrial farmers are locked in a chemical arms race with nature. To grow the perfect, unblemished russet Burbank potato, the only kind that can make the long, golden French fries demanded by companies like McDonald's, they douse their fields with a staggering cocktail of toxic chemicals. One farmer tells him he won't eat the potatoes from his own fields until late in the season, after the systemic pesticides have dissipated. From this perspective, the new leaf potato seems like a godsend. It allows farmers to eliminate some of their most toxic sprays. But it's a solution that raises a whole new set of questions. By engineering the plant, we have breached the wall that separates species. We are moving genes from bacteria to plants, from fish to tomatoes. We are rewriting the operating system of life itself. And we are doing it to prop up the same fragile system of monoculture that failed so catastrophically in Ireland. The desire for the perfect, uniform McDonald's French fry, available anywhere in the world, has created a global monoculture of taste. And that monoculture of taste requires a monoculture in the field. Genetic engineering becomes the silver bullet that allows this fundamentally unstable system to continue. But for how long? The insects will eventually evolve resistance to the Bt toxin. Nature will adapt. Our desire for absolute control creates a new, more complex set of problems. As Pollan writes, every step we take towards simplifying nature in the garden or the farm is an invitation to a new kind of disorder. The 4 stories of the apple, the tulip, marijuana, and the potato are really one story. It's the story of a dance that has been going on for 10,000 years. A dance between plant evolution and human desire. These plants have succeeded beyond their wildest dreams because they found a clever, upright ape who was willing to do their bidding. We cleared forests for the apple, spent fortunes on the tulip, risked our freedom for cannabis, and drenched the earth in chemicals for the potato. We became their agents of evolution. And in return, they gratified our desires. They gave us sweetness, beauty, transcendence, and a sense of control over our world. They have changed us as much as we have changed them. The book ends where it began, in the garden. But the garden no longer looks like a place where man imposes his will on nature. It looks like a conversation. A place of give and take. Pollan returns to the image of Johnny Appleseed, drifting down the river. His strange little boat, with the man in one hull and the seeds in the other, becomes a beautiful metaphor for a better way of thinking about our place in nature. Not as masters, but as partners. Two beings, balanced, side by side, helping each other stay steady on the river of time, heading into a future that belongs to both of them. Commentary. When you finish a book like The Botany of Desire, the world feels different. It feels more alive, more intelligent, and infinitely more interesting. That, for me, is the mark of a truly great work. It doesn't just give you information, it gives you a new lens through which to see everything. The most powerful lesson in this book is that simple, profound shift in perspective. We are so used to seeing ourselves as the subjects of history, as the active force in the world, with nature as the passive backdrop. Pollan gently, but persuasively, asks us to consider that we are also objects of nature's design. Our human desires, for sweetness, for beauty, for a change of mind, for order, are not just cultural whims. They are evolutionary forces, as powerful as a bee's attraction to nectar or a bird's instinct for migration. And the plants have been listening. This matters so much today because we are at a moment in history where our power over nature seems almost absolute. We are editing the very code of life with genetic engineering. We are changing the climate of the entire planet. We hold the fate of countless species in our hands. And in this moment of peak hubris, Pollan's book serves as a vital, humbling reminder: our control is, and always will be, an illusion. Nature is not a machine to be tinkered with, but a complex, adaptive system that will always have the last word. The story of the Irish potato famine is not just a historical tragedy, it's a permanent cautionary tale. So what can we do with this new perspective? How does it change the way we live? First, it invites us to be more curious about the everyday things around us. The next time you pick up an apple, don't just see it as a snack. See it as the culmination of a 10,000-year-long conversation between a plant and a primate. Go to a farmer's market and try a variety you've never heard of, a black twig or a northern spy. Taste the diversity that we are in danger of losing. You will be casting an evolutionary vote for a more interesting world. Second, get your hands dirty. Plant something. It doesn't have to be a whole garden. It can be a single tomato plant on a balcony or an herb in a pot on your windowsill. When you take responsibility for the life of a plant, you start to see the world from its point of view. You notice the sun, the water, the soil, the insects. You become a participant in that ancient dance of coevolution, and you realize how deeply interconnected we all are. And finally, pay attention to your own desires. Notice how they shape the world. The food you choose to buy, the flowers you admire, the kind of order you seek in your life, these are not small things. They are signals that ripple out into the world, shaping the fields of Idaho and the apple orchards of the future. You are an evolutionary force. Wield that power with awareness and with care. This book is a beautiful reminder that we are not separate from nature. We are one of its most creative, and most dangerous, inventions. By understanding the botany of our own desires, we can learn to be a more graceful, more humble, and more intelligent partner in the great conversation of life on Earth. That was a summary of The Botany of Desire by Michael Pollan. We've touched on the main currents of this incredible book today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. The real magic happens when you actually travel there yourself. It's in the quiet moments of reading, when a particular story or a simple phrase hits you in a way you didn't expect. This summary is designed to help you decide if this book is worth your time. If anything we've talked about today has sparked your curiosity, I urge you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning facts, it's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see your world, from the food on your plate to the very nature of your own mind. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book from the world's most fascinating bookshelves. Let's keep growing together.